So let's start in the Garden of Gethsemane. If you go to Matthew 26, verse 36 to 38. Wow. Lots of scriptures. Oh, come on. Verse 36, 26, verse 36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." So the demeanor of Christ changes all of a sudden. He's suddenly full of sorrow and anguish, and he's deeply troubled. And the reason this is so was because he was fully aware of what was about to happen. He was fully conscious of the fact that he was about to be crucified. He'd been aware for some time, but now it really hit him. And crucifixion was the worst way to die. It was the worst method of execution ever conceived. It originated Asia Minor, areas like Turkey, Assyria. That's Asia Minor, around the 6th century BC, so 600 years before Christ. Not sure exactly who invented it. That man, I don't know. And then the Romans adopted it as a method of capital punishment around 300 BC. And they used it as a method of capital punishment until around 341 AD. 341 AD, what happens? Christians are finally in charge. So crucifixion was banned by Christian emperors, probably Constantine. Because in 341, the cross went from a curse to a blessing. So it was capital punishment of the worst kind. It was scary, it was terrifying, and the very thought of it was terrifying to people. And it was used as a sort of psychological, it was psychological warfare. One time there was a revolt of slaves in Rome, led by a slave called Spartacus. He raised up an army of slaves, and they almost took down all of Rome. Eventually, they are defeated by the Roman army, and in their anger, the Romans crucified 6,000 prisoners. And they hung them up along what was called the Appia Way. It was a highway from Rome down to the southern tip of Italy. 6,000 of them. Now, if it's 6,000, that means if you went along that road, every 40 meters would be someone hanging on a cross. And they were just left there. The bodies were not removed. They would be eaten by birds and wild animals, and they would decay there. It was to terrify all slaves and anyone who was not a citizen of Rome. Anyone who revolts against us will get this. It was horrible. So for the Romans, it was a slave's execution. In Rome, there were citizens, and then there were slaves and non-citizens. It's sort of class A, class B, right? It was a slave's execution for the most heinous of crimes, rebellions. It was considered a grave shame and dishonor. Self-respecting Romans didn't speak about it. To say the cross was to say a swear word to Romans. It's not a 4-letter word, it's 5. But, crux. Yeah, that's a crux. So you couldn't speak of it. It was so shameful. To be crucified was a grave, grave shame and a grave dishonor. Now, the idea of shame and dishonor mean more to past generations than to us, right? Because we are more individualistic. But it was unspeakable. So it was so bad that no Roman citizen, no matter what they did, could ever be crucified. It didn't matter how many people they killed. It didn't matter what rebellion they led. A Roman citizen could never be crucified. It was a slave's execution. For Jews, it was a curse. Deuteronomy 21 verse 23 says, "Cursed is any man who hangs upon a tree, a pole," right? And Galatians 3:13 references that. So what this means, what Deuteronomy 21:23 doesn't mean that Jews were crucifying people. It would mean some people, when you were executed for a particularly terrible crime, your body would be hung up somewhere for a day just to show how bad it was, what you had done. And so being hung upon a pole, upon a tree, came to represent a curse. So you were cursed. You became a curse yourself. So in Galatians 3:13, Paul says Christ became a curse for us because he was hung upon the cross. So for both the Jews and the Romans, the cross was a great disgrace, a great defeat. It was to be utterly annihilated, utterly dishonored. Thus, no divine being would ever allow it. And this is why Paul says that the gospel is a stumbling block to the Jews, and it is foolishness to the Greeks. Because the Jews are thinking, there's no way the Messiah is gonna allow himself to be so disgraced as to become a curse, as to be crucified. It's not possible. It doesn't make sense. And this is exactly why the Jewish authorities wanted him crucified. It was a statement. They were saying it's not possible for this to be the Messiah because the Messiah cannot be crucified. It's not possible. And the Greeks, the Romans, would say, "It makes sense. How do you celebrate the most vulgar thing in our society? How do you celebrate a criminal's death? How can your God submit to a criminal's death?" Does this make sense, right? It is lost to us because 2,000 years later, Christ has turned the greatest disgrace into the greatest blessing, and it can be lost to us. We don't understand. So when Paul says, "I preach Christ and him crucified," it's a statement, a declaration that I don't care what you say. I don't care that this is offensive to you. I don't care. But this is the truth. I preach Jesus, and I preach that he was crucified, and that crucifixion set me free. This is the gospel. This is the gospel. A stumbling block for the Jews and foolishness for the Greeks. Anyway, back to the garden. So Jesus was aware what would befall him. How did he know this? First, remember when Jesus says, "I do only what I see my Father doing." So Jesus had this habit of pre-living his days. He would go into the Spirit, hang out with the Father, see what the Father was doing. Isn't that interesting? It made me wonder, because I always thought it was God the Son that was crucified, right? And I realized the Father participated in it. It would be nice when we get to heaven and we look at the Father to check if he's got scars on his hands. He probably does. Jesus pre-lived. He pre-lived his crucifixion. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And the second reason we know Jesus knew what was about to befall him is because of the choice of place that he went to pray. Gethsemane means olive press, right? The Garden of Gethsemane was an olive grove. It was an orchard for olive trees. And the name means olive press. Olives are pressed to make oil. And what would happen when olives were pressed? Typically, the olives would go into this press. This heavy stone would roll over them and crush them. And to get all the oil out, the olives would usually be pressed 3 times. Does that sound familiar? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So Jesus goes, he prays for an hour, comes back, prays for an hour, comes back, prays for an hour, comes back 3 times. And each time he's in such agony. He's so crushed. He cannot bear it. At some point, the pressure of what is happening to him and what is about to happen to him is so intense that an angel has to come and just give him fresh strength, because he's collapsing in the weight of what he is going through as he is being pressed. And sometimes we can lose so much because the Bible writers can be so as a matter of fact. We just think, oh, he was sorrowful and troubled. Okay. And then, this was intense. Because in that moment, Jesus took upon himself the curse. He took upon himself our infirmities. He took upon himself our sorrows. All of us, for all time. Billions upon billions upon billions of lives. All the suffering, all the sorrow, all the trouble rests upon Jesus Christ from that moment, and it crushes him completely. And if you go to Luke, what is it, Luke 22? Should be Luke 22, 44. I'm going too slowly. I'm going to have to speed up soon. See, this should be done on Good Friday. 22 verse 44. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. This is documented only by Luke, right? Because it was a medical factoid. Luke, being a doctor, he thought, oh, this is interesting, What Jesus was experiencing then was a rare phenomenon called hematidrosis. Hema is blood. Drosis refers to sweating. So it's Latin for sweating blood, right? But saying it in Latin is so much cooler than he was sweating blood. He experienced hematidrosis. So it's a rare phenomenon that is documented to occur. There's one case series with 76 cases of people experiencing this sweating blood. And it's always associated with extreme stress and extreme duress. Half of them is related to severe illness, the other half with severe psychological distress. Sometimes perfectly healthy people will experience it. in times of severe anxiety and severe stress, extreme anxiety, such as facing impending execution, shipwreck. One woman, so it was that intense. We don't know how it happens or why it happens, but we know it does. So he's literally sweating blood, and he's losing blood. It said this was a cold night. At this time of year, around March, April, it's really cold there. Temperatures will average 8 to 20 in the day. It can go down below 0 at night. So it's a freezing night. We know it's cold because in John 18:18, it says it was cold. It was cold. It was cold. So he's freezing. He's in anguish. He's lying on the ground, feeling like the weight of the world, the literal weight of the world, is upon him, and the crushing is pressing blood out of him. It's pressing blood out of him. Move on. I was tempted to bunny trail, but I won't bunny trail. What this also does is, after you've sweated blood, your skin swells and it gets very tender. Just to be touched is painful. To have clothes on you, the weight of your clothes is painful. So physical pain already starts at that point in time. Then Judas comes. With all the guards and whatnot, sent by the Sanhedrin to arrest Jesus. Judas greets Jesus with a kiss on the face. That kiss would have been painful. Quite painful. And I won't go into the details of his being tried. But in the end, Jesus was crucified because of blasphemy. He declared he was the Son of God. How did he declare he was the Son of God? When he was asked, Jesus, are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of God? He says, I am. And you will see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of glory. That's a reference to Daniel 7. You should read it. So Son of Man is more a divine title than Son of God, because it's always associated with God himself, right? So every time Jesus says Son of Man, he's calling himself God. It's just, it gets lost in the translation for us. But when you take Daniel 7 into context, you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. So he's then condemned, even though this was illegal. I'll resist going to that. Then at that time, he's beaten, right? The Jewish council could not execute anyone, but they could beat you, they could do anything else. They were allowed to by the Romans. So he probably at that time received a Jewish flogging. A Jewish flogging was 39 stripes. You were hit 39 stripes because in Deuteronomy 25, verse 1 to 3, it describes how much you could punish someone. You couldn't punish them more than 40. You couldn't hit them more than 40 times. Anything more than 40, God said that's too much of a dishonor. So just do 40. And so as to show their mercy, Jews only would get to 39. So it's likely beaten up, at least that's what I think. It's not clearly documented. It just says, they beat him. Probably struck 39 times. These would not have been, taps on the back or taps on the back of the hand. This is hard stuff because this was as much as the Sanhedrin could do, so they would have made it as hard, as terrible as they probably could. So Jesus is beaten for the first time. Remember, his skin is already sensitive. Then early morning, he's sent to Pilate. Jesus is before Pilate for the first time. Pilate is a bit reluctant. He was actually very reluctant to condemn him because it didn't make sense, right? Here's someone they were celebrating 5 days ago. Now they want to crucify him. So he realized that this is just some church politics happening there. It's just religious politics. So he was reluctant. So trying to avoid the issue, he sends Jesus to Herod Antipas. Briefly, Jesus has an interaction with Herod Antipas, then comes back to Pilate. In all of this, Jesus probably walked about 3.5 kilometers or so that morning, because all these places are relatively close to each other. It feels like long places, but they're relatively close. But he'd been extremely cold that night. He hadn't slept, had been in extreme anguish. He's already pretty exhausted. He'd had the worst night of his life. So Jesus comes back to Pilate the second time. Pilate feeling pressure from the Jews. I'm assuming knowledge, right? I assume we all know this story, so I'm not going too much into detail. But feeling pressure from the Jews, he offers to punish Jesus and then release him. The Jews say no. He said, "What?" So Pilate says, "What do you want?" They say, "Crucify him, crucify him." Then next Pilate offers, "Okay, how about I give you a choice?" He brings out Barabbas and says, I'll offer you Jesus, the Messiah, called the Messiah, or Barabbas. It's quite interesting. Another quick bunny trail. If you go to Matthew 27, verse 16 and 17, about this, it says, yeah, there we go. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" So the Jews are offered 2 Jesuses. And they said, choose one. The first is Jesus called the Messiah, the Jesus we know. The second was Jesus. He was a famous criminal who had been involved in an uprising. Yeah, it so happened in that uprising, people got killed, things got out of control, things happened, he was arrested. But someone pointed out to me this morning, Barabbas. Do you know what that name means? Ba means son of Abba. Son of the Father. 2 sons. And Jews were told, do you want this Jesus or that Jesus? And because Barabbas was a political figure, he was closer to the political Messiah who would set them free from Rome that they wanted, and so they chose him. I'll let you stew on that. I was like, wow. So Pilate finally relents and says, fine. He washes his hands of the matter and says, do with him what you want. So, yeah. Is that the moment? Okay, yeah. So Jesus is handed over to be flogged by the Romans. But Romans didn't flog. They scourged. The Roman scourging was bad news. It was literally being beaten to death. So it was a mandatory punishment before execution to be scourged. Scourging was done by two professionals. The people whose jobs were to beat people. They were called lictors. Maybe that's where we get the term licking. They got a good licking. So they were called lictors. And they did this for a living. It was systematic. It covered the entire body. It wasn't just the back, but it covered every part of you. They would hit every part of you. And they used what was called a flagrum, or the other name is the cat of nine tails. I wish I had a picture. Anyway. But it was this whip with 9 leather straps, and to the ends, little iron balls and sometimes sheep bones would be affixed. And that's what they used to beat you. And so there were instructions of how to run down your back. And so they'd go down the back, then down your thighs, down to the soles of your feet. Every part of you, up your arms, there was a systematic way by which they would do this. The severity of the beating depended on, how the lictors were feeling on that day. If they were feeling like having a really good time, they had a really good time with you. The intent was to weaken the victim, get them close to collapse or death, just not quite, just really close, to beat you half to death or most of the way to death. There was no limit to the number of times they could hit you. I know sometimes it's been said Jesus was struck 39 times. Truth is, probably not. Often Romans would hit you far more than the 39 just to offend the Jews, because they knew the Jews wouldn't hit you more than 39 times, so they would go far beyond that. He was probably struck 200-300 times. Because they would go. And what would happen when they hit you on the back? Those iron balls would strike against your skin and cause it to bruise. It swells, blood comes, it becomes sensitive. And those leather straps then cut the skin. Those sheep bones scrape into the skin, and every time they hit, it scrapes a little bit more, and it cuts down into the fat below the skin called the subcutaneous tissue, just to make it sound medical, right? Into the subcutaneous tissue, and it cuts, and eventually cuts down into the muscle and starts pulling up strips of muscle. And they would go all the way up and down, up and down. Under no obligation to stop, because you're a second-class citizen. Jesus was not a Jew. Jesus was not a citizen intentionally. He was equivalent to a slave. So they could have their way, right? So extreme pain and a lot of bleeding. Often, some people would be beaten to death. They would die from the scourging. Flesh could be ripped off. Some people were disemboweled, and because guys got out of control. It was nasty. And remember, was it my wife who said earlier that Jesus didn't have to do this. He chose this. Now, in Isaiah 50, verse 6, it says, I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. He freely offered. And there's reason to think that Jesus' scourging was more severe than usual. One reason would be the title that Jesus was carrying, the Roman soldiers would be saying to each other, "Oh, this is the King of the Jews. Oh, that's nice." So they want to make a statement. And they want to have fun, right? Peter refers to Christ's scourging in 1 Peter 2, verse 24, and says, "By his stripes we were healed from our sin." And we have a lot of sin, guys. A lot of stripes required. But after this, Jesus is taken from the scourging, and then he's taken to the tower of the soldiers, to the praetorium, to God, where he's beat up again with a stick on the head, and they crown him with a crown of thorns. Now, the crown of thorns was a mock honor. They dress him in a red robe, a purple robe, because he was the king of the Jews, right? Now, what the crown of thorns was saying, in Rome, the highest honor was what was called the crown of grass. So whenever a general would win a great victory or conquer territory, he would be paraded and dressed in a crown made of vegetation from the area that he'd conquered, whether it was trees, leaves, whatever, flowers from the area that he'd conquered. And so Jesus, this is what the soldiers were mocking, but isn't it interesting, being crowned with a crown of thorns? First time we hear about crowns and thistles is in Genesis 3, verse 17. Wow, like I said, lots to go through. God says to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field, but it will produce thorns and thistles." Thorns were part of the curse. So Jesus is crowned with the curse that was put upon mankind. It's all of it, right? So not only is talked about our sin and our suffering, but the curse that is upon not just us, but the entire planet, the entire realm is placed upon him as well, unwittingly giving him authority over everything. Now, after this, Jesus is taken back to Pilate, because Pilate hasn't yet said, "Okay, crucify him." He hasn't yet said that. So he's presented to Pilate and to all the Jews. And this was public. And here's this man who's been beaten all the way to almost death, staggering along, shuffling along with a crown of thorns, bleeding. Now, scalp wounds bleed a lot. They really, really do. His face has been beaten to a pulp. Isaiah 52, the end of Isaiah 52. That's the beginning of the passage about the suffering servant. The passage about the suffering servant starts in Isaiah 52, verse 13, goes all the way to the end of Isaiah 53, which is verse 12. But there's a phrase in there. Sorry, the wind blew my page away. It says in verse 14, just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, his form marred beyond human likeness. He had been beaten unrecognizable. Or unrecognizable. He'd been beaten so much you couldn't recognize him. And so here's this man walking before Pilate, before everyone, and Pilate says, behold the man. That wasn't mocking. It wasn't a threat. It was, guys, just look at him. Look what's been done. You know? And he doesn't say, behold your king. He says, behold the man. Just, look at him. Must we still crucify him? After all of this? And the Jewish council instigates all the people and insists, crucify him, crucify him. If you don't crucify him, you're rebelling against Caesar. So Pilate relents, right? Washes his hands of the matter. I'm making Pilate sound like a good guy. Pilate was not a nice guy. He was not a good guy in any measure. It's just the Jews were a problem because they were God's people. They had this idea that they were not supposed to be ruled by anyone. So they were constantly revolting, rebelling. And Pilate had been told that next time there's a revolt in Jerusalem, it's your head. So he was really trying to keep his head on his shoulders. Because the Jews were a problem. So Jesus is condemned to crucifixion. Now crucifixion, finally crucifixion. Yay. Wow, okay. I don't know. Anyway, we'll go fast. Crucifixion was done by a team of 5, basically, right? 4 soldiers, 1 centurion. The centurion's job was to certify the death of the victim. So what would then happen from the point where the crucifixion victim had been scourged, he was to carry his cross. It was usually just the cross beam of the cross, called the patibulum. Gotta love Latin. This is the cross beam of the cross was about 34, 35 to 57, almost 60 kgs. So Jesus is wearing 50 kgs of weight and carrying it along, all the way from there up to where he was crucified. And for Christ, at some point, this becomes overwhelming and he simply can't go on anymore. And so Simon of Cyrene is compelled to help him carry the cross. There were different types of crosses. One was just a stake like this. One would be like the usual cross that we know. One was like capital letter T. The capital letter T was actually the most commonly used one in Jerusalem. We don't actually know for sure which one was used because, well, no one really wanted to be sharing those gruesome details. But we do know he carried at least the crossbeam of his cross. When he got there, he would be thrown on the ground, like with his thing literally just thrown on the ground. And as he hits the ground, all the wounds probably open up again. It's extremely painful. He starts bleeding all over again. And while he was laying on the ground like that, they would stretch out his hands, his arms, stretch them out, and use nails. The nails were 13 to 18 centimeters long. These were long items. So about this long, right? A little shorter than my microphone. Really long. Iron nails, and they were not new nails. The Romans would reuse the nails. So you'd crucify one. It was like production line. You crucify them, take the nails out, use them on the next one, use them on the next one. So they would reuse nails. And the nails would then be put through the hands. Which part of the hand is unclear? Which part of the hand it was? Artists often depict it as through here. The problem with here is there's not enough support to carry the weight. So some doctor, this was a surgeon. Only surgeons do this. Only surgeons do this. So, yeah, it had to be a surgeon. So he took amputated arms, right? Every once in a while, someone has to have their arm amputated. So he'd get those arms. Then he experimented to figure out which part of the hand would carry weight. And he figured out if you put it here in the middle of the palm, where we often imagine, it couldn't carry the weight of a person, so it would rip out. So they didn't do it there, but probably closer down here or in the wrist joint proper. If you take your ring finger and push it down as far as it goes, you get to what are called the carpal bones. These ones, they form this dense mat. These small little bones. So those are the carpal bones, right? They connect this to these long bones of the hand, right? So that's probably where they would have pushed it through. And there's a way to do it so that you can put a nail through without breaking any bones, which is important because the Passover lamb, no bones are supposed to be broken, right? So they would have done that. The problem with doing that, or the great thing about doing that for the Romans would be to go through there, you have to go through a big nerve called the median nerve. This is the biggest bone going into your hand. And it supplies muscles in the hand. It also supplies sensation for half of your hand. So you have to go through that vein, that nerve, or at least touch it. Have you ever knocked your elbow against something? Bah, and then there's a zhh. It's because you've knocked the median nerve as it passes the shoulder, around the, not shoulder, elbow. So that's the same nerve. It then comes out through there. So this was intentional. So they knew it would cause excruciating pain. So if your nerve is attacked, damaged like that, it's going to cause intense, we call it lancinating pain. So sharp, electricity just throughout your whole hand. It goes up your arm. It's intense pain. So this side, that side, then they hang you up. Also good for the Romans is not a lot of blood. There are no major blood vessels there. The arteries that go into the hand are there and there. So they're intentionally avoiding killing you. Crucifixion was not a great way of killing anyone. It was not particularly efficient by design. So they avoid any major artery, any major blood vessels, because they want it to hurt, right? It's extremely painful. Then they go through the feet. Around there are also big nerves. What are the names? I wrote it down somewhere. I had it down. Yeah, there we go. Deep peroneal and lateral plantar nerves. So there are big nerves in the feet as well that they're were going to get damaged as the nail went through, right? So, to affix your feet to the vertical beam, there are different ways to do this, right? They would either open your legs up, put the beam inside, and put 2 nails through here, there, and there. But that was not efficient because it required 2 nails, right? And nails are in short supply. So most times, they would put your feet together and then stick a nail through. Highly efficient, great. May cause a little bit of bleeding, but it was okay. Now, to do that, because it was vertical, you really had to flex like this, right? So that becomes very uncomfortable. Then they'd lift you up onto the cross, put you there, and then just watch you suffer. But not much bleeding. But Jesus already bled a lot as it goes, right? Another thing that would happen as you're hanging there is it's extremely difficult to breathe. You should try this when you get home. I tried it. It's very difficult to breathe if your hands are stretched out, because your chest is constantly forced to stay open, right? Now, the lungs are bellows. They need to collapse and open up. They open up to take in air, collapse to take it out. So when you're stretched out like that, your chest is held out in inhalation. You're breathing in, but you can't breathe out. So you're suffocating. So the only way you're going to be able to breathe out is you have to lift yourself up. You got to lift yourself up so that your chest has room to breathe out. What are you going to lift yourself up on? You have to push yourself up against your feet that are nailed. So you're going to push against the nail in your feet. But to come up, your hands have to rotate, right? So your wrists are rotating against the, yeah. And to do that, you're also rubbing your back that has been beaten raw against the vertical stake. Now, this was not a fine wooden table. This is just a rough piece of splintered wood. It's probably been used 100 times. So your back was in pain, your arms were in pain, you couldn't breathe, your feet are killing you, literally. And this just goes on, but all the while, there's not a lot of bleeding happening, so you're not bleeding out quickly. It's designed to be painful and to go on and on and on and on and on. The term excruciating, crux is cross. So excruciating means out of the cross. It means the suffering of the cross. So when we talk about it was excruciating, it's a reference to the cross. It's the worst suffering conceivable. And it lasts long. Some people could stay up on the cross for an entire week. Most people would stay there maybe 3-4 hours up to 3-4 days, depending on how badly you'd been beaten up, you'd been scourged before. So just depended on your condition. So Jesus stayed up on the cross until about 3 p.m., which is about 6 hours, which was a short time, which speaks to how badly he had suffered before, right? His body had just had it. How did he die? He probably died he died from hemorrhage. He bled out. A bit of difficulty breathing. We call it asphyxia. Nice medical term, eh? And just from the trauma of it all. Some people say maybe the spear wound that he got is what killed him. So, a quick note on some of the things that Jesus said. Isn't it amazing that in all of this, Jesus is saying, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. At some point, Jesus says, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, right? Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? And I wonder about that. Are we saying the Father had forsaken the Son? Is that what it means? That's a difficult one. I'm not sure exactly what was happening. Oh, yeah, what was happening in the Spirit. We'll also do that. I'm honestly not sure. But Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? Is Psalm 22, verse 1. Jesus was quoting Psalm 22, verse 1. Now, because Jews generally, because you didn't have access to a Bible at home, to a Torah at home, you had to memorize. So when Jesus said, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? Everyone in the crowd would have continued the psalm. And it's the psalm where Jesus says, they have pierced my hands and feet. The bulls of Bashan are gathered around me. Come back to the bulls of Bashan. So Jesus started praying Psalm 22, and all he could say because of his condition was, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? But he's really quoting Psalm 22, which is not a psalm about abandonment, but a defiant statement in the face of grave suffering. You should read it when you get home. Then he says, I thirst. Now the thirst he would have been experiencing, it's not just, I haven't drunk anything since morning. It's this maddening thirst that people who are going into shock experience. So he's bled a lot. He's lost a lot of fluid. His blood volume is low. So physiologically, his body starts telling him, we need water to restore blood volume, to fix ourselves. Otherwise, we're shutting down. And so your body sends this intense signal to the thirst center in your brain and says, drink water now. So this is people who experience this. It's a maddening thirst. They get hallucinations of water. They are desperate for water. So when Jesus says, I thirst, it's not, he's experiencing intense, intense thirst. Soon after that, Jesus says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, and he gives up the ghost. He dies. After 6 hours, he expires. Now, another thing that's happening in the spirit. Now, this was warfare that was happening. Jesus declares war on the kingdom of the enemy, the devil, and his entire hierarchy. From that moment at Caesarea Philippi, and he starts going towards Jerusalem. At Caesarea Philippi, it comes out clearly where Peter proclaims, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. From that moment, it's a declaration of war against the enemy. And I imagine all of hell's forces, Satan and all his orders, were arrayed against Christ. Because this was war. And the devil genuinely thought he could win. Because he's had significant victories before. The fall. And Psalm 22 describes this experience that Jesus has. In 12, it says, "Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions that tear their prey open their mouths wide against me. I am poured like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It is melted within me. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for a garment." It's amazing. 1,000 years before. David writes this 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. And he describes crucifixion even though it didn't exist. It's incredibly prophetic. It's amazing. And so all hell's forces are arrayed. They're there to watch the show, right? Thinking, we have finally, this was God's great plan. This is the Messiah, and we have defeated him. So we do this, then back to our original settings, we continue to run the joint. Another quick note on making sure you were dead. So basically, no one ever survived crucifixion because it was the job of the soldiers who were crucifying you to make sure you were dead. If they failed to ensure you were dead, it would be their heads. Right? So they were really good at making sure they're dead. And people know when someone is dead, right? And so they made sure, and they made sure in two ways. It's either they would break your legs when they're tired of just watching you play, but they would break your legs, both legs. So what happens when they break your legs? You can no longer lift yourself up, right? So you can't breathe anymore. So you then suffocate, you die of asphyxia. Or they would put a spear through your chest and pierce your heart. So option one happened to the two that were crucified beside Jesus. Now, when they get to Jesus, it looks like it's like, oh, he seems already dead. So one soldier says to another, "Shah, make sure." So what he would do, he would put a spear through the right side. And you think, oh, that's weird. I thought the heart was on the left side. So they put it through the right. And the aim is to hit the right side of your heart because the right side of the heart is less muscular. There's less pressure there. It's more likely to bleed out, actually. It's more difficult to control the bleeding there. If you put a spear through the left side of your heart, you might actually survive that. There are people who have had a knife put into the left side of the heart. The knife is still in there, and they walk into the emergency room. It's literally in your heart, but because the left side is so muscular, it can stop bleeding. So Roman soldiers were taught that's not where the killing blow is. It's through the right. So it was put through the right, and it would pierce the heart, and blood would fall through. Something weird happened with Jesus because blood and water flowed out. So it seems what probably happened, Jesus developed what's called a pleural effusion, which is a collection of fluid from all the trauma and all the beating of the lung. So fluid collected in the right lung, and this fluid would be clear. So to get to the right side, he went through that collection of fluid and then hit the heart and opened, then pulled out the spear. So first, that collection of fluid would come out, and it would come out clear, looking like water, and then the blood would follow. It's just interesting medical factoid. Anyway, but by this time, Jesus is already dead. Oh, yeah. My time. Okay, we'll aim for 11:30. Is that okay? So Jesus is finally died, and he's hurriedly buried because the day after was a particularly holy Sabbath because it was Passover. So Joseph of Arimathea collects the body, quickly prepares it, puts some herbs and spices, but not the full treatment that a body would normally get. They were running out of time. The day was about to end. Sabbath was about to start. And so it was a really holy Sabbath, so no one could do any work. It was like March 31. No one could be seen on the streets. So he's buried. Joseph of Arimathea had a burial cave that he'd prepared close by, so he uses that. And Jesus spends 2 nights there. At least his body does. I wonder what he was doing. Oh, interesting. Guys, there's so much. At the moment of Christ's death, if you read Matthew's account, because Matthew is full of drama, the earth shakes, the veil is torn in the temple, the ground is split open, and saints long dead get raised to life. Now imagine this moment. Death is coming to swallow up Jesus Christ. And all of a sudden, alarm bells start ringing. Our prisoners are breaking out. They're breaking out everywhere. What's going on? They're just they're coming to life. They're coming to life everywhere. Alarm bells in the spirit. And then all of a sudden, the devil and all his fellows realize, Christ. There's something wrong. Something is seriously wrong with this picture. Why is life erupting? Why? When we just killed him, why is life erupting? Something is seriously wrong. Should I do this or not? So, in different places in the New Testament, it described what Jesus did for 2 days. He went down into the spirit. Now, that's Ephesians 4. Let's go to Ephesians 4 real quick. Because Jesus did at least 2 or 3 things. Where's Ephesians? Ephesians comes after 2 Corinthians and Galatians. So, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. So, it says, verse 8, this is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. Verse 9, what does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. So Jesus goes down. So that's a reference to the spirit realm where the dead lived. Now, the way Jews looked at the world at that time, there was heaven where God was. There's the earth realm. And then there was Sheol, the realm of the dead. And I think Sheol was divided into 2, right? Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It was divided into 2. Abraham's bosom, where the good people went, and Hades, where the not so good people went, right? But no one was living in heaven per se, except maybe Enoch and Elijah, and not like we think about it as Christians now. So Jesus goes down, not in defeat, but all of a sudden in absolute victory. He goes into a dark room, and all of a sudden the light turns on. The thing with darkness is not something. It's not a substance, right? Darkness is the absence of light. So it's not actually strong in any way. How do you conquer darkness? The moment you turn light on, darkness just ceases to be, right? So the light of the world enters the realm of the dead and turns the light on. and the cockroaches scatter. Have you ever been in a house? You turn the light on, Kuma 3, there's cockroaches everywhere. Not my house, but cockroaches scatter everywhere. Scatter. And it's just bad news. Like, he is ransacking hell, preaching that the Son of Man has come to take captivity captive, to take the captive dead who were under the governance of death. I'm coming to take my own. I'm coming to take my own. He ransacks hell. There's this. Yeah, okay. There's this short, that was like 30-minute animation released by Marvel about 15, 20 years ago called Hulk versus Thor. Right now, everyone knows Hulk, everyone knows Thor, right? So they have them have a fight. Somehow, the Hulk dies. He really, Bruce Banner, who's the Hulk, he's tired of being alive, so he chooses to die. So the Hulk goes down into Hades, the realm of the dead, and he starts wreaking havoc. He's destroying everything, beating everyone up, making a mess of everything. Eventually, I'd forget her name, but she's in Norse mythology. She's the goddess of death. She's like, Asha, come take your people, your person, take him back to the living, because Jesus made a mess of the order there. He made a mess of everything. Takes the keys of Hades, takes the keys of death itself, and says things have changed. It says things have changed, Another thing is a public proclamation. 1 Peter 3 is this weird passage. It ties with the book of Jude, which you'll have to read on your own. But it says from verse 18, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built." So this is a reference to the angels who did not keep their station. They're called the watchers in Genesis 6. You should read Genesis 6. Those angels were imprisoned, awaiting judgment. So Jesus goes down and he tells them, yeah, I just won. The day of judgment is coming. You're still there. You thought you were winning a victory. Because today, Jesus is dying. Jesus comes down and says, you are still there. I am victorious. And something like that happens every time we get baptized. When you get baptized, you get immersed into the water. You get presented in the realm of the dead. And Jesus declares victory with you in there and says, I'm taking you out. Every time baptism is spiritual warfare. So if you read the rest of this passage, 20, 21, 22, it then goes on into baptism, and it just tells so much about how wonderful baptism is. Finally, Jesus is done doing what he's doing, and on Sunday, Resurrection Day, yeah, no. Oh, okay. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 54. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? So Jesus comes to life today on Resurrection Sunday, completely victorious. And from then on, the order of the entire spirit realm changes. Before Christ, the devil could say, all these nations have been given to me. They actually belong to me, because man had ceded dominion to Satan. But what Christ does is he wins back dominion over the nations. That's why in the commission, Jesus says, go ye therefore and preach the gospel in Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, because now God is no longer located in one nation. He is now taking dominion over all the nations. I have won back authority over all these nations. All the princes, all the principalities, all the territorial spirits, all authority that they had has been taken away by Jesus. And so Jesus has inherited a name that is above every name that is named in heaven or on earth. And this is how Jesus won. The order of things changed. The order of things changed completely. Now, when we die, we go to where God is, because we are Christ's body. No longer do we go into this waiting zone, Abraham's bosom. Not anymore. The entire anatomy of the spirit realm changes with what Jesus did on Resurrection Day. Why don't we celebrate him? Why don't we celebrate the victorious Jesus? He has done so much for us. And I went through so much so quickly. So much of this stuff deserves its own sermon, but I hope you followed along. I'd love us to do communion. So if we can get the elements to go around. And to do communion with celebration. I should have asked you to do this already. So just quickly get elements. Jesus, on the day that he died, took up the cup and he said, "This